So my name is Angie Aurora, and I am from Canada. I'm a veterinary social worker and have been working in the areas of pet loss, bereavement, and compassion fatigue for the last 15 years. And so I've had the honor of really being alongside people during their times of grief through counseling and support groups. I'm also a professor with Seneca College here in Toronto in the social work department. And, to that end, I really want to thank my colleagues for setting the context of the next part of our conversation, which is really going to dive a little bit deeper into looking at, when do we make the referrals and how do we make the referrals to both of the support groups that are available. And before I get into that, I just want to very briefly touch on a research study that I just completed with Seneca College in partnership with VCA Canada. And it's quite interesting, even just to hear, Laurie, what you shared earlier, because some of our findings are really aligned with what you had shared. And so what we have determined, which I don't think should come as a huge shock from our research, in which we surveyed over 300 people and spoke with a number of industry experts, is that there is a critical gap in the referrals that are made to pet loss support by veterinary practices. Now is not the time to sort of get into the reasons why, but I think if we are in agreement that that gap exists, it sort of strengthens then the need for talking about how do we actually make the referral. Because I think, Sherry, as you mentioned earlier, sometimes we just don't even know how to broach that conversation. And so what was really interesting in the research is that we found that close to 85% of research participants were never told or informed about any type of pet loss support in their area, whether that was counseling or support groups. Even more interesting then is that of those people, again, nearly half stated that had they known, it's something that they quite likely would have accessed. So kind of reinforcing that 1 and 2 number. And so I really do appreciate that comment around not judging who we think will or will not use the supports. Just finally, of people who did access any type of pet loss support, about 85% of people found it helpful. And so I think that's a really validating number and another encouraging stat as to, really why we should be making these referrals. And so, I've already started the conversation here, but why is it so important to make the referrals to whether it's the caregiver support group or the pet loss support group? We know that pet loss is considered a form of disenfranchised grief. In really simple terms, it's still not societally recognized as a quote unquote legitimate or valid form of grief. That, as a result, often leaves people with a lack of support. And so these groups really are here to fill that void. And as has been mentioned, really to make sure that these are environments where people can be around others who just get it. We know that clients are looking for reassurance and validation. This is very prevalent through their animal's entire life and the caregiving for their animal during their entire life, but it becomes very, very poignant towards end of life. And so that could be reassurance around decisions that they're making to care for their animals. But what our research also found is that clients are looking for validation, again, not surprisingly, even after their animal passes, right? Because we know that guilt is a very profound emotion that's often experienced. And so by participating in groups like this, people often have that opportunity to kind of work through some of those really difficult and challenging emotions. And so the next piece here is, when and how do we actually have the conversations? And I'd like to just start by first talking about the caregiver support groups. And so a really, good time to be bringing these conversations up is when we're already starting to talk about end of life issues with the pet. And so, for example, it could be at the time where a terminal illness is diagnosed, or whenever end of life becomes part of the conversation. And so, as Andrea already spoke about, the anticipatory grief really lends itself to a referral to this type of group. More concretely, a specific time where this could be mentioned is if we're already engaging in quality of life assessments as it pertains to the pet, this is a really good opportunity to kind of validate and also talk about the fact that we understand that the client is probably going through their own range of emotions and challenges. And so, if you kind of remember that when you're having the quality of life conversations pertaining to the pet, the flip side of that is let's also talk about the quality of life for the caregiver. We also recommend that, when we're thinking about making referrals, that it's not just a one event thing, that we're looking at it more from a macro perspective. And so it's important to start early by normalizing the service. And you can do this by even just keeping the posters that Sherry showed up in your practice, in the waiting area, in more visible areas. Just kind of knowing that it's there helps to normalize that, okay, I don't want to think about it right now, but when the time comes, it may be something that I remember. It's also showing clients that the practice is taking this seriously. And the other thing that I've seen a lot as well is the more that clients are aware of these types of supports being offered, they will also share this with their friends and family. And even if they decide to not use the service, may make a referral for somebody else to participate as well.